I'm a bird, mother. I'm a bird.
Nintendo updates their EULA to allow them to brick your console if you disobey the rules. So basically, first they updated it to make it resemble more like what Disney is doing, and now this on top of it all. So let me put my knife away.
Video, I discussed an update that Nintendo recently posted to the end user license agreement involving the waiving of your right to sue them, specifically to engage in things like class action lawsuit. Basically, Nintendo added a forced arbitration clause that forces you to, on a contractual level, if you use Nintendo products and make things like Nintendo accounts, to arbitrate things with them on a one-to-one basis instead of being able to take them to court. How much that clause can hold up really depends on the state, depends on the courts and judges and whatnot, but it's just this extra layer of protection because Nintendo was bombarded with lawsuits after the Switch 1 era faced wide issues in regards to Joy-Con drift that forced a lot of people to have to repurchase Joy-Cons because of...
Well, yeah, I didn't know they had lawsuits about that. I mean, it makes sense, but I didn't know that was happening.
Product itself just wasn't very long lasting. Its longevity just wasn't what it should have been. And so Nintendo added this clause to the EULA, and it is something that a lot of people find to be rather questionable. The only way for you to get out of this forced arbitration clause is to send a written letter to Nintendo within 30 days of you signing up for a Nintendo account or agreeing to this end user license agreement. They're making the process of that as tedious and insufferable.
Of course.
And just as
the more inconvenience you provide to people to opt out of something, the less likely they are to opt out of it. It was a case in US for a long time where when you sign up for something like a subscription service, you actually had to physically send them a letter to unsubscribe through it. And I think even the courts in US decided to make it illegal to do that. That it should be as easy to subscribe and unsubscribe. Like, it has to be on the same level. But it looks like Nintendo's trying to do that too.
Sneaky as possible, so that a lot of people are forced to essentially become a part of this end user agreement without the ability to get out of that forced arbitration. So that was already a whole situation that a lot of people found shady. But what recently came to light is that the update to the end user license agreement features another element that is worth bringing up, one that may allow Nintendo to brick your console if they feel like you're not in accordance with the end user license agreement.
That should not be legal. What the hell? Imagine doing that in error, right? You accidentally break someone wrong. This is gonna... I cannot wait until people start buying Switch 2 and this happens to them by accident or by quote-unquote mistake.
Following information was noticed by news outlet GameFile, specifically Stephen Totillo, published the following article that highlighted some of those portions of the end user license agreement that has changed to a degree where it just feels rather extreme. So let's look at Nintendo's end user license agreement, or their account user agreement, which was changed on May of 2025, which added clauses in regards to forced arbitration that tries to prevent you from, allowing you to class action lawsuit them. And then beyond that, scrolling down, section 2 here was...
Definitely, this is for the reason so people cannot do any modifications, which... for me, it just reminds me how, like, the PS1 era, how everyone would take their PS1 to the local electrician who fixes, like, your DVD players and stuff like that, and have them, like, modify it so you can play, like, the pirated CDs with games there. It looks like Nintendo is just trying to tackle people doing any sort of modifications. Like, even though you bought the product, you're not allowed to modify it to what you want to do with it. Maybe it's also to protect themselves that people will have to buy the new versions later on.
Was recently changed, and this is the portion that I want to read out loud as it has some pretty significant implications. It reads right here: without limitation, you agree that you may not A, publish, copy, modify, reverse engineer, lease, rent, decompile, disassemble, distribute, offer for sale, or create derivative works of any portion of the Nintendo account services. B, bypass, modify, decrypt, defeat, tamper with, or otherwise circumvent any of the functions or protections of the Nintendo account services, including through the use of.
This is really damning though. Copy or modify, specifically the modify thing. So are they talking about like inside, or are they even talking about the outside? Like there's a lot of like even Etsy handcrafters who modify the Switch on the outside to a specific like game aesthetic. Would that apply under it too? Would that be an issue? How about like the Switch controllers? Are you not allowed to modify those either? So it's like, I really wonder to which extent does it go? Is it like also the peripherals?
Any hardware or software that would cause the Nintendo account services to operate other than in accordance with.
Wait, does that include fixes? Most probably. Most probably.
With its documentation and intended use. C, obtain, install, or use any unauthorized copies of Nintendo account services. Or D, exploit the Nintendo account services in any manner other than to use them in accordance with the applicable documentation and intended use, in each case without Nintendo's written consent or express authorization, or unless otherwise expressly permitted by applicable law. You acknowledge that if you fail to comply with the foregoing restrictions, Nintendo may render the Nintendo account services and or the applicable Nintendo device permanently unusable in whole or in part.
So they'll just remotely brick your device. Holy hell. The only device I have that can be remotely bricked is like a pin calculator I have from my bank. So in Estonia, we have the system where you have like a little device with like numbers on it. So to access your bank, you put in your login information in the bank. Then the bank gives you a little window of time where you pick up your pin calculator, put in their login, a different login there, and then it generates a number for you that you put into the bank to access your online bank. And if you open it to change the batteries, they brick it so in case someone got access to it and is trying to get your information through it. Because like in Estonia, if you have access to that, you get access to their taxes, to their social security and all that stuff. That is like the only instance I have experience of remote bricking a device. And that's only for safety reasons. I cannot wait for disgruntled exes to start doing that. It's gonna happen. You know how exes are. You know how petty people are. You know that's gonna happen sooner or later. You break up with someone, and they'll brick your Switch.
Yep.
It is no secret at this point that Nintendo is absolutely not a fan of customers being able to take the console that they bought and modified in the way that they want, whether it be hardware or software modifications. Nintendo does not like homebrew at all, in large part because it does pave the road to potential piracy. Nintendo's been all about, taking down ROM websites and emulation websites. And with the upcoming...
And Nintendo also doesn't like when you play and stream their game. They'll take that content down too.
Yep.
Especially on YouTube. If you stream Nintendo games on YouTube, I'm sorry, but you're screwed. If you make a video reviewing Nintendo games, you're screwed. Unless you're partnered with them. Otherwise, you're just at their mercy. Anything that has to do with Nintendo on YouTube, at least, they will go after you.
Launch of the Nintendo Switch 2, they want to make sure that their console is as ironclad as possible when it comes to security measures to prevent people from downloading their games and just running them on their console without buying them. And they're casting this wide net of like, if you in any way, shape, or form engage in homebrew activity or modification activity, then we have every right to essentially brick your console, to render your Nintendo device permanently unusable in whole or in part.
There you go. Permanently. There's no reverse on it. It's a kill switch.
If you get one, probably pay a programmer to try and remove the kill strip.
Okay, so the kill switches usually have sensors if someone's trying to tamper with the kill switch.
This was a clause that was not there in the old end-user license agreement. This is what it said before that change happened, as archived here by GameFile. You're not allowed to lease, rent, sublicense, publish, copy, modify, adapt, translate, reverse engineer, decompile, or disassemble all or any portion of the Nintendo account services without Nintendo's written consent or unless otherwise expressly permitted by applicable law. But there was no clause here about the consequences of what could happen if you violate this end user license agreement. There was no clause about Nintendo just being able to render your Nintendo device permanently unusable in whole or in part. So in agreeing to the new end user license agreement, what Nintendo is saying is, if we feel like there's any shady activity going on your console, any activity that...
If we feel like it. So there's going to be a lot of false bricking happening.
we deem shady, then we will send a kill switch that will kill your console if we so desire. Now, I don't know if, say, like the Nintendo Switch 2 has the capability of being completely disabled by Nintendo, if they have the capability to send some kind of kill switch that can render your console useless. We don't know the technical aspects of how Nintendo would be able to do that.
Well, the second Nintendo Switch 2 is gonna be out. People are gonna be dissecting it in videos and checking if there's an actual kill switch inside. Cannot wait for those videos to come out and Nintendo making sure that those videos go down.
100%.
But Nintendo is covering their bases here if they have the capability to do that. If you sign up for a Nintendo account or if you sign up to Nintendo services and engage with Nintendo products, they just want to give themselves the leeway to be able to disable your device permanently if they don't like what you're doing with it. Now, it seems as though this update to the end user license agreement isn't for all regions, because in the UK, for example, the user agreement reads differently, as highlighted here by Nintendo Life. The UK version of the user agreement, for example, reads as follows. Any digital products registered to your Nintendo account and any updates of such digital products are licensed only for personal and non-commercial use on a user device. Digital products must not be used for any other purpose, in particular without NOE's written consent. You must neither lease nor rent digital products nor sublicense, publish, copy, modify, adapt.
Wait, published? Would that mean also like content creators?
Translate, reverse engineer, decompile, or disassemble.
And again, this is so vague, it's really hard to understand if that's also what goes under it.
Any portion of digital products other than as expressly permitted by applicable law. Such unauthorized use of a digital product may result in the digital product becoming unusable. Now, I don't know if the reason for why the user agreement is different in the UK is because consumer protection laws don't allow Nintendo to just send a kill switch for a device that
probably each country has its own set of laws, and usually no matter what the company is, they need to abide by those sets of laws. Like, for example, even with like the iPhone in US, an iPhone can be version A, but in Europe it has to be version B to go according the rules.
Customer bought, or if it's because they're just still updating things region by region. But Nintendo is clearly on a path to try to exert as much control and autonomy over how you use your own hardware as much as possible. Now look, on one hand, Nintendo is allowed to take any measures they deem necessary to protect their products, their intellectual property. They are allowed to put in measures to stop piracy and the like. But a lot of people, myself included, feel like they're crossing a line with giving themselves any sort of capability to send any sort of kill switch for a device.
Well, they intentionally are leaving it vague enough to tackle anything that they deem non-brand friendly according to their views. So
Yeah,
they just keep it vague enough.
A customer purchase. Once you buy a piece of hardware, you should be allowed to do with that hardware what you want, as long as it is within the confines of the law. And yes, homebrew can lead to piracy, but homebrew inherently isn't piracy. It can be used for that purpose, but some people can modify their consoles and not engage in any activities that would, by the letter of the law, be considered illegal or even morally, reprehensible. If somebody, say, wants to homebrew the Nintendo Switch 2 so they can play videos like MP4s and whatnot on it, then that's not piracy, and that is not illegal in any way, shape, or form. They're just, by their own ingenuity, adding an additional functionality to a product that they own through their own volition, and that is something that would be wrapped up under the umbrella of this wide net that Nintendo is casting of any sort of modification, regardless of whether the modification is for legal or illegal purposes. Any sort of modification will give us the right to kill your console, to send a kill switch, to brick it as we deem fit. It's bad enough that it feels like we don't own our games, and with the Switch 2, with them coming out with game key cards that still require downloads, rendering those kinds of physical versions of games completely useless in terms of what you'd expect from a physical media purchase.
Well, those physical ones are just a room accessory. And it has been that way for a while.
And with just the general degradation of physical media, especially in the video game sector, where even if you have a disc or a cartridge, some kind of download is required, thereby rendering the purpose of that media, the physical aspect of it, just kind of not what it was meant to accomplish. With so much autonomy already being lost over our media library, it's crazy to think that we're now starting to lose autonomy over the actual box of hardware that runs that media, because companies are giving themselves the capability to send a kill switch, to brick your console remotely if they so desire, or at least adding clauses in their contracts and their end user license agreement that state that if they were to come up with a way to do that, that you would not be able to fight back against that, regardless of whether the activity you engaged in by modifying the console was actually illegal or not. Emulation by itself isn't illegal. Homebrew by itself isn't illegal. Modifying consoles, hardware, software-wise, by itself is not illegal. Emulation, homebrew, mods, those are all just tools, but it's how you use those tools that defines the legality of your activities. In the same manner that a fork by itself isn't illegal, but if you stab someone with a fork, then you get in legal trouble.
Or a spoon.
Or a spoon.
I had a classmate who tried to stab the teacher with a spoon. Fun story. Not gonna go more into detail about that.
Then, consequences are warranted, but if you use your fork to eat your meal, then that is just an activity that cannot be persecuted by the law. I don't know if that metaphor made any sense, but all I'm trying to say is that the precedent of a company having the means to disable a hardware device that you own is just a dangerous precedent. This is Nintendo's way of trying to fight piracy, but the way you really fight piracy is by making things better and more convenient than privacy. And you have seen over the years, Nintendo hardware and software have sold incredibly well, and the piracy aspect hasn't been like so woefully detrimental to Nintendo as to negatively impact their business to a point where it's this giant red flag where it is going to kill their business. Just make your products.
Imagine being Steam right now, just watching Nintendo doing all of this, and all you need to do to outsell Nintendo, just sit back and do nothing.
Services, the convenience of getting games through you, so just seamless and so easy and just so much better with features that make the gaming experience on the platform so good and feature complete that it's preferable over the piracy practice. And that's how you win. It's what Gabe Newell said about how piracy is a service problem more than anything. I mean, let's face it, at the end of the day, pirates will eventually figure out how to crack this thing wide open and find ways to like not get in trouble while at it and find ways to.
All I'm having in my head is like the Indiana Jones scene with the gem and the bag. The hackers figuring out Nintendo Switch 2 hacking.
Yep.
Just Indiana Jones music playing.
Disable Nintendo's ability to engage in sending kill switches if that is something that is within their capabilities. They'll find a way to eventually get homebrew up and running. Like that is just inevitable. It's just going to take some time. And when that happens, there's no stopping pirates. And for those who are not engaging in piracy but are still engaging in homebrew, they are not doing anything that is actually illicit. They're just doing something that Nintendo would prefer that they don't do, but aren't actually doing something illegal, and nothing that would warrant or justify Nintendo sending a kill switch and rendering the hardware that they bought that they can do with what they want, because at that point the hardware is there. They didn't buy a license to access the hardware. They bought the hardware, and when you sell a product whose hardware is dependent on the software, you have to make the software functional. You can't just send a kill switch just because they did something that you didn't like but wasn't actually illegal, and so their purchase was rendered useless. You made them spend money and then you killed their product from a distance, even though they didn't actually do anything illegal. Like, that is a line that when you cross and you normalize, it's going to start to potentially lead into an era where corporations will not only exert control and autonomy over your ability to access your games, but also start exerting control and autonomy over your ability to access the electronic that you bought, the electronic and its functionalities, and your ability to use the hardware that you own, where a corporation can just kill the functionality of the electronics that you purchase, just normalizing that in any way, shape, or form, just that capability existing at all is something to be deeply concerned about because of the ways that could be potentially exploited and the way corporations, will essentially really want to control how you use the stuff that you buy. And it's a question of
And now pan to how like the 70s and the 80s thought 2025 is gonna look. And in reality, this is 2025.
Yep. His face is my face right now.
How in 2020, how in 70s and 60s and 80s, they thought in 2025 will be with flying monkeys and a flying car, just eating tablets of food instead of even hassling with actual food. That's how they saw the future, but in reality, oh, my handheld just got bricked because I tried to download a game. I wanted to switch a battery. I wanted to fix the cable broken. It's bricked now.
is Nintendo even allowed to do this? If somebody didn't actually do something illegal by modifying the console and, through the use of homebrew and whatnot, if Nintendo were to send a kill switch because they didn't like that, is that something that can be contested in court? Are they allowed to sell a product where they are the judge, jury, and executioner on whether people are allowed to continue to have access to the functionalities of the device that they purchased? That's an area that's very questionable, and I'm curious as to how legally that would actually hold up if this were to be questioned. Should someone present a case where they actually didn't do something illegal through the modification of the Nintendo Switch 2 console or whatever that they purchased, that they homebrewed, but didn't actually engage in, say, piracy? So yeah, food for thought. I don't know. I just thought this was worth bringing up, especially.
Yeah, no, this is really bad. And 100% there'll be other companies looking into it as an example and following suit.